The Duke of Ellsworth came home to be married in the spring of 1817, and his own tenants bowed lower to the plain woman riding beside him than they did to him, and he could not for the life of him understand why. He had been away nearly 2 years. He told himself it was business that kept him in London, the debts, the lawyers, the endless untangling of the ruin his father had left knotted around the estate, but the truth which he did not tell himself. It was grief and cowardice in equal measure that he had buried his father and looked at the vast failing weight of Ellsworth Park, and simply could not face it, and had fled to town and left the whole of it to his steward and his own averted eyes. He was 31, and he had inherited a great name and a greater debt, and a hard season, for the summer of 1816 had come without warmth. The crops black in the field, the harvest failed across half of England, and the winter that followed had been the cruelest in living memory. He knew in a distant way that it had gone hard on his people. He had not come to see how hard. He had sent instructions and money down to his steward, and stayed in London, and not looked, because a man who does not look need not know what he has failed. Now he came home to marry, because his father's dying wish and the state of the accounts both required it, and the woman he was to marry rode beside him up the Ellsworth Road. Miss Beatrice Fenn, of the neighbouring Fenn family, a quiet, unremarkable gentlewoman of 24, whom the two families had long ago agreed would make him a sensible, suitable, done, exciting wife. He thought he knew her tolerably well. He thought her pleasant and plain and dull, a dutiful woman who would keep his house and give him an heir and ask little, and he had agreed to the match with the resignation of a man agreeing to a reasonable medicine. And as they rode up through the villages of his own estate, his tenants came out to the roadside, thin, worn, winter-hollowed people, and they pulled their forelocks to the returning Duke with the flat courtesy owed a landlord, and then they turned to the plain woman on the grey mare, and their faces changed. They bowed to her as though she was something holy. An old woman pushed forward and pressed a single early primrose into Beatrice Fenn's gloved hand, and could not speak for weeping. A man lifted his hat to her and held it against his chest and said low, "God bless you, miss. God bless you and keep you," in a voice thick with a feeling the Duke of Ellsworth had never once earned from any of them. The Duke looked at his quiet, unremarkable bride, being blessed like a saint by his own starving people, and understood, with a cold turning over in his chest, that there was something about the woman he was going to marry that his tenants knew, and he did not. The match had been made the way such matches were, over the heads of the two people it concerned. The Fenns and the Ellsworths had been neighbours for 100 years, and when old Mr. Fenn died, leaving his daughter, Beatrice genteel, and dutiful, and very nearly penniless, a fine old name, a small dower house, a box of her late mother's jewels, and almost no money at all, it had seemed sensible to everyone concerned, who had a great estate, and needed a wife who understood the country, and would not expect to be adored. Beatrice had accepted him with a composure the Duke had taken for coolness, and had rather liked, for he had wanted nothing so little as a wife who expected to be adored. He had been adored once by a woman who had died, and had decided he was done with the whole ruinous business of feeling things. He had courted her in so far as he had courted her at all, in a handful of dutiful visits, and he had come away each time with the settled impression of a calm, plain, sensible woman, with a low, pleasant voice, and steady hands, and nothing whatsoever remarkable about her. He had noticed, the one thing he had noticed and dismissed, that she wore always a single ring, a worn gold band, set with a small garnet, her mother's, plainly the last good thing she owned, and that she turned it on her finger when she was thinking. He had thought idly that it was a modest little jewel for a woman marrying a duke, and had thought no more about it, because he had not been in the habit that year of thinking much about anyone but himself. There had been one moment in all those dutiful visits that he ought to have marked and did not. He had called at the Fenn Dower house on a raw December afternoon to settle some tedious point of the marriage articles, and had been kept waiting, which no one kept a duke waiting, and had grown cold and irritable in the little parlour, and when Beatrice came in at last, she came in with snow still on the hem of her plain gown, and her boots wet through, and her hands red with the cold, having been, he gathered out, on some errand of her own she did not explain. He had asked, idly, where a gentlewoman found to go on such a day. She had looked at him a moment, as though weighing whether he was truly asking, and then said only, "Out. There is a family at Ludden's Cross with a new baby, and no fire. It could not wait on the weather." And she had sat and discussed the marriage articles with perfect composure in her wet boots, and the Duke had thought, vaguely, how odd that she troubles herself so over strangers, and had passed to the next clause, and had not once, connected the woman with snow on her hem to the tenants of his own estate an hour's ride off, because he had not been thinking about his estate at all, and had assumed, the way the careless assume, that whatever she did with her cold afternoons was no concern of his. He had not known, could not have known, having refused to look, that while he sat in London refusing to feel things, the plain, sensible woman he was going to marry had been all through the black winter, quietly keeping his tenants alive. He began to learn it in pieces, because Ellsworth Park was full of pieces that did not fit the story his steward told him. Sedgwick had been steward at Ellsworth for 20 years. A smooth, grey, comfortable man who met the returning Duke with every assurance that all was well, or as well as such a season allowed, that the relief the Duke had sent down had been distributed, that the tenants had come through, that there had been hardship, of course, but that his Grace need trouble himself with none of it, and the Duke, who wanted more than anything to be told he need trouble himself with none of it, very nearly let himself be told. But there were the pieces. There was the state of the tenants, which was worse than hardship, gaunt children, sold off stock, cottages stripped of anything that could be burned or eaten. There was the graveyard at Comberton Church, where the Duke walked one evening, and found the winter's toll of small new graves, more than a hard season alone should have left. And there was, everywhere, the name, Miss Fenn, spoken by his people, with a reverence that made no sense at all, until the Duke, unable to bear the not knowing, stopped an old farmer at his gate, and asked him plainly what the whole county seemed to know that he did not. The farmer's name was Thomas Rudge, and he was a proud old man, not given to weeping, and he wept, telling it. "You don't know, then," Rudge said. "You truly don't know." "God forgive me, we all thought you knew, thought you'd sent her near enough, thought it was the great folks' own quiet way of doing charity without the fuss." He took off his hat. "The relief never came, your Grace. Whatever you sent, and I'll believe you sent it. Looking at your face, it never come down to us. We'd have died, the most of us, that January. My own grandson had the low fever and no bread in the house and no coal, and I'd have buried him with the others under that black frost. And it was Miss Fenn come to the door, in the snow, on foot, with a basket, grain and coal and a bottle of physic, and a way about her that never once made a starving man feel he was taking charity. And she come back. All winter she come back, to us and to every hard-hit family on this estate, and half the next, and she never said a word about where it come from. And she made us swear not to trouble the great house with it. We found out where it come from, though. The pawnbroker in Marlow talks. She sold her mother's jewels, your grace, piece by piece, the whole winter, to buy bread for your people. And the last of it, the last thing she had, she sold this Candlemas, to get us through to the thaw. His voice broke. She sold her last ring, sir, to feed a duke's tenants that the duke had forgot. And she's to be your wife, and you didn't even know. The Duke of Ellsworth stood at the old man's gate in the failing light and could not speak, for the shame of it had come up in him like cold water, and under the shame, rising, something else. The slow, astonished dawning that the plain, dull, unremarkable woman he had agreed to marry as one agrees to a medicine was in point of fact the finest person he had ever met in his life, and he had been too busy pitying himself to see it. He looked at her differently after that, and looking, he began at last to see. He saw that her calm was not coolness, but the deep steadiness of a person who had decided, young, to be of use rather than to be admired. He saw that her plainness was the plainness of a woman who had sold every pretty thing she owned and thought the trade a bargain. He rode the estate with her now, for she went among the tenants still, quietly, seeing to the ones not yet recovered, and he watched her kneel in a cottage to spoon broth to a sick child, and remember every tenant's name and trouble, and do the whole of the work he had fled to London to avoid, and do it with her own 2 hands, and her own soul jewels, and no expectation of a soul ever knowing. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked her, on the ridge above Comberton. The whole green, wounded sweep of his neglected estate below them. "One letter, one word. Your people are starving, and your steward is lying, and I am selling my mother's ring to keep them alive. You had every right. Why did you let me go on in London, thinking all was well, when you of all people knew it was not?" Beatrice Fenn was quiet a moment, turning the finger where the ring was no longer. An old habit her hand had not yet unlearned. "Because you were grieving," she said at last, "and because a man does not do his duty better for being shamed into it by a woman's letter, he only comes to hate the woman. And because," she stopped and chose honesty, for she was made of little else, "because I did not do it for you, your grace, and I did not want it to become a thing that was about you. I did it for them. They were hungry, and it was cold, and someone had to, and you were not here, so it was me. That is the whole of it. There is no sacrifice in it worth the name. I sold some jewels I could not eat to buy bread for children who could not eat either, and I would make that trade 100 times and call myself the winner of it every time." She looked at him, level. "So do not thank me, and do not offer to repay me, and above all do not turn a thing I did for love of them into a debt between you and me. I could not bear it. Only be the duke they needed. Be that, and we are square, and more than square. That is all the thanks I will take." And the Duke of Ellsworth, who had come home to marry a plain, sensible woman he did not expect to love, looked at Beatrice Fenn on the ridge in the wounded evening light and understood that he had already begun, and that it was the first true and undeserved good fortune of his squandered life. He found that he could not stay away from her after that, which was a novelty. For a man who had spent 2 years perfecting the art of staying away from everything. He came to the Dower House the next evening on no pretext at all, which he had never once done, and found her in the small parlour mending a tenant child's coat by the fire. Not her own work, not a lady's fancy work, but a poor child's torn coat, because there was always, with Beatrice Fenn, some hard-used thing being quietly made whole. And he sat down across from her without being asked, and watched her hands, and did not for once want to be anywhere else in England. "You are staring, your grace," she said, not looking up. "I am," he admitted. "I have discovered, rather late, that I married the wrong estimate of you, and I am trying to correct it, and it is taking my whole attention. I thought you plain. I cannot now think where I got the notion. I thought you cool. You are the warmest person I have ever sat in a room with. You have simply spent your warmth when no one thought to look for it, which is not the same as not having it, though I was fool enough this 2 years to mistake the one for the other. He leaned forward. I find I do not want a sensible medicine of a wife after all. Beatrice, I find I want you. The actual you. The one with snow on her hem that I was too blind to see in December. She set the coat down then, and looked at him, and the fire was low, and the little parlour was very quiet, and he was near enough that one honest movement would have closed the whole careful distance between a duke and a poor gentlewoman who had sold her last ring, and neither of them moved, and the moment stretched, warm and perilous. The nearest the two of them had yet come to the truth. You must not say such things to me because you are grateful, she said low, and it was not quite steady. Gratitude is a poor foundation for a marriage, and I would rather have your plain indifference honestly than your admiration on false grounds. I did not feed your people to earn your... It is not gratitude, he said. I know the difference. I have been grateful to a great many people. I did not, in the least, wish to sit beside mending coats. And her breath caught, and the inch between them very nearly closed. And then the maid came in with the candles, and the moment folded itself away unspent, as such moments did, but they had each seen it now, and a thing seen cannot be unseen, however careful the folding. But Mr. Sedgwick had been listening to the county too, and Mr. Sedgwick was afraid. For the smooth grey steward had not merely failed to distribute the Duke's relief, he had stolen it, pocketed the money sent down for the tenants across the whole black winter, secure in the knowledge that an absent, grieving, self-pitying Duke would never come home to count graves. And now the Duke had come home, and was riding the estate with his eyes open at last. And worse, far worse, there was Beatrice Fenn, who had been in every stricken cottage on the estate all winter, and had a woman's quick eye, and had noticed as she went the thing that did not fit, that there had been relief money spoken of, promised, entered in the great house's own book, and that not 1 farthing of it had ever reached the people it was meant for. She had said nothing all winter, being busy keeping children alive. But she had not forgotten, and she kept folded in her mother's Bible the pawnbroker's receipts, and a quiet, careful list of what the estate had recorded sending, and what the tenants had actually received, because Beatrice Fenn was a person who noticed things. Sedgwick moved to save himself, the only way such men can, which is to poison a well before anyone can drink from it. He went quietly to the Duke, grave and reluctant, and he told him, as a loyal servant grieved to speak, that he feared his grace was being imposed upon, that the Fenn woman's famous winter charity was a calculation, a poor gentlewoman's clever way of buying the tenants' loyalty and the county's admiration. A duke, that she had spent her last jewels not from goodness, but as an investment in a coronet, and had spread her tale through the servants' halls on purpose, that his grace should be wary of a woman who had contrived to be blessed like a saint in the very road in front of him, on the very eve of the wedding. It was cunningly done, for it took every true and beautiful fact and gave each one a rotten heart, and for 1 black hour, in his old habit of expecting the worst of everyone, the Duke of Ellsworth half believed it. And Beatrice saw that he half believed it, for it was in his face at dinner, the old coldness come back, and it wounded her more than the whole hard winter had, not because she wanted his coronet, but because she had, without meaning to, come to want his good opinion, and here it was curdling in front of her over a lie. She did not defend herself. That was the thing that nearly undid it. She had never done any of it to be admired, and she found she could not now begin to plead for admiration. But she would not walk into a marriage on a lie either, And so, the night before the wedding, she went to him, to Ellsworth Park, impropriety be hanged, with her old nurse for a chaperone, and she said what had to be said. "You have gone cold on me these 3 days," she told him, standing very straight in his great cheerless library, "and I have watched you do it, and I know the shape of what you have been told, for it is the only thing that fits. Someone has told you I did it all to catch you. I will not argue it. A woman who argues that her goodness was real only makes it look calculated, and I will not perform my own heart for you to inspect. So, I will say only this once, your grace, and then you may believe it or not, as you choose, and I will hold my peace either way." Her chin came up. "I did not sell my mother's ring for a coronet. I sold it for a child at Ludden's Cross, who would not have seen February. If you marry me tomorrow believing otherwise, I will still be a good wife to you and a good friend to your people, because those things were never conditional on your good opinion. And if you cannot marry me without suspecting me, then release me tonight, cleanly, and I will go home and go on carrying baskets, and want nothing from you but that you feed your tenants better than you have. But do not stand at that altar tomorrow, and take my hand while a lie sits between us, that I could not bear. Choose which you will do, it is yours to choose. It was always going to be yours." And she waited, in the cold library, having offered him her freedom rather than her defence. And the Duke of Ellsworth, looking at a woman who would sooner hand back a dukedom than plead for it, felt the last of Sedgwick's clever poison curdle to nothing in him, for no schemer alive had ever offered to walk away the night before the wedding. "Forgive me," he said, low, and meant it to the roots. "I have spent 2 years believing the worst of everyone because it was easier than believing I had to be worth something to anyone. I let a small man make me doubt the best person I have ever known. I do not deserve you, Beatrice, and I am done pretending otherwise. Marry me tomorrow. There is no lie between us. There is only a fool who is trying very late to become worthy of you." She searched his face a long moment and found the truth in it, and forgave him, for she was made of forgiveness as much as of anything, and went home to be married in the morning, not knowing that the morning held one more reckoning she had not arranged. They came to the church at Comberton on the wedding morning under a soft spring sky, and the whole estate came with them, for the tenants had asked, and the Duke, in the one decent instinct he had managed that fortnight, had said, "Let them come, all of them," and the little church was full to the doors with the thin, recovering, winter-worn people of Ellsworth, come to see the plain woman who had saved them married to the lord who had not. Mr. Sedgwick sat near the front in his good coat, composed, certain he had done his work, certain the Duke's revived suspicion would keep the dangerous woman at arm's length and the dangerous winter safely unexamined. The service began. The old words rolled out, and the parson came to the place that every soul in the building knew, and asked, as the form required, whether any man could show just cause why these two should not be joined. And Thomas Rudge stood up. He stood up in his mended Sunday coat, an old proud farmer trembling at his own daring, in a church where a tenant did not speak, and he said, "I can't show cause against it, your grace, and I'd not if I could. But afore you say your vow to her, there's a thing you're going to hear said out loud, in front of God and this whole parish, because it's been said only in whispers too long, and it's not right, it's not asterisked. Right asterisked that she should stand up there and marry you, and half this county still not know what she is." He turned so the whole church could hear him, and he told it, all of it, the snow and the basket and the sick children and the winter of quiet salvation, and the jewels sold piece by piece, and the last ring parted with at Candlemas to buy the bread that brought them to the thaw. "She made us swear not to tell the great house," old Rudge said, weeping openly now, past shame. "So we held our tongues all winter while she emptied her mother's jewel box into our children's mouths. But I'll not hold it at her own wedding." You're marrying the best woman in this shire, your grace, and every soul in this church that's still drawing breath is like as not drawing it because of her, and you'll hear us say so before you make her yours. God bless you, Miss Fenn. We'd have died. And you sold your mother's ring. The church had begun to weep with him, the whole thin crowd of them, and the Duke of Ellsworth stood at the altar with his shame and his wonder and his half-believed lie all breaking apart together in his chest, and it was in that instant that Mr. Picker, Sedgwick, feeling the ground go out from under 20 years of theft, made his fatal mistake, and rose and said smoothly into the weeping, "A very touching tale, and no doubt embroidered in the telling, your grace. This is precisely the calculated display I warned you of, and Beatrice Fenn, who had borne the whispers, and the winter, and the half-belief, in silence would bear the slander of these grateful weeping people no longer." She let go of the Duke's arm and turned, at the altar, in her wedding gown, and she faced the steward across the crowded church, and her low, pleasant voice carried to the last pew. "Do not," she said, "call these people liars at their own church, Mr. Sedgwick, to save yourself. For I have wondered a long while why they needed me at all, why a great estate that recorded sending relief all winter let its people starve within a mile of a full granary, and I kept the wondering, and I kept the accounts." She drew from her mother's Bible the folded papers she had carried, all these months, the pawnbroker's receipts, and the quiet, careful list. Here is what Ellsworth's own book says was sent down to the tenants this winter, and here is what the tenants swear they received, which was nothing, not one loaf, not one lump of coal. The difference, Mr. Tarr, Sedgwick, is the exact measure of what I sold my mother's jewels to make up, and the exact measure of what went into your pocket while these children died. I did not spread my winter through the servants' halls to catch a duke. I never wanted it known at all. But you have made me speak to save these people from being called liars. So now the whole parish will hear it, and so will his grace. And so, I think, will a magistrate, that the tenants of Ellsworth did not starve because the harvest failed. They starved because you are a thief. There was no answer to it, because there was no answer to it. The papers were in her hand, and the graves were in the churchyard, and the truth was in every gaunt, weeping face in the pews, and Mr. Bree, Sedgwick's 20 smooth years came apart in the space of one sentence, before the whole assembled estate, and he was taken up on the pawnbroker's evidence, and the estate's own doctored book within the week, and the money he had stolen from the mouths of children was clawed back from him to the last farthing, which the county agreed was a fairer justice than even the courts usually managed. And the Duke of Ellsworth turned to the woman in the wedding gown who had just at their own altar saved his tenants a second time, from the lie as she had saved them from the winter, and he did the thing he should have done from the first day, and had been too small until this hour to do. He took both her hands, the bare finger and all, in front of God and the parish and the people she had kept alive, and he said, loud, so the whole church heard, "I came home to marry a plain, sensible woman I thought I knew, and I find I have been given by a mercy I have done nothing to earn, who fed my people with her own hands, while I hid in London from my own name. I have no right to her. I mean to spend the rest of my life becoming a man who does." He looked at old Rudge, at the weeping pews. "You blessed her on the road, and I did not understand it. I understand it now. Hear me make my vow to her, all of you, and hold me to it, for you have more right to than I ever gave you." And he married her, and the vows he spoke over her bare and jewelless hand were the truest words the Duke of Ellsworth had ever said in his life. Mr. Carr, Sedgwick went to answer for his winter at the assizes, and the estate he had bled came slowly back to life, under a duke who did not ever again look away from it. For Alexander of Ellsworth had learned at his own altar the one lesson his grief had hidden from him, which was that a great name is not a thing you are given, but a thing you owe. And he paid it thereafter, every day, with his wife beside him, showing him how. They rebuilt Comberton, and the cottages, and the trust, and the tenants of Ellsworth came in a few years' time to bless the Duke in the road as warmly as they had always blessed his Duchess, which he said was the only honour he had ever cared to earn. He never took another steward's word for the state of his people again. He rode the estate himself each quarter day, in all weathers, with his wife beside him, and old Thomas Rudge lived to see the granary at Comberton kept full against any winter that the sky might send, and to hold the Ellsworth heir on his knee. The story of the Christmas: his grandfather nearly starved, and a plain young lady came through the snow with a basket and sold her mother's ring. And on their first Christmas, as man and wife, the Duke gave Beatrice a small box, and in it was her mother's ring, the worn gold band with the small garnet, the last thing she had sold to buy the bread that saved his people. He had spent a good part of the autumn tracing it, from the pawnbroker at Marlow through 2 dealers to a shop in London, and had bought it back at 10 times what she had sold it for, and thought it the cheapest thing he had ever purchased. He slid it onto her finger himself, above the wedding band, so that her hand that had gone bare for a whole winter to feed his tenants would never go bare again. "You told me not to repay you," he said, "and I have not. This is not repayment. A winter's worth of children's lives cannot be repaid with a garnet, and I would not insult you by trying. It is only that a hand like yours ought not to go without the one thing it gave away, and I could not rest until I had put it back." And Beatrice Fenn, Duchess of Ellsworth, looked at her mother's ring returned to her own 2 hands by a man who had become, in the end, exactly the Duke his people needed, and understood that the finest bargain of her hard and generous life had turned out, by no design of her own, to be the one she had never once been trying to make. Out beyond the windows the estate lay white and healed under the Christmas snow, and every hearth on it was warm, and the wind that crossed it carried, as the wind does, the only true memory of the winter a plain woman had emptied her mother's jewel box into the mouths of the hungry, and been seen at last by the whole of the world she had quietly saved.